All right. Let me tell you a little bit about the Canadian Cloud Council then. And I want this, I have a lot of slides, but I really want this to be a discussion. So if you have questions or just yell them out at any time. And I'm going to go through any kind of presentation kind of quickly, and then we can see where the discussion might go later. So the Canadian Cloud Council is a not-for-profit industry association. We just started up about a year and a half ago. A number of people who are working in cloud in Canada just thought somebody has to do something about something because Canada is falling behind in the cloud. So let's do something about it. So around, let's say January, we started a little bit earlier than this, but around Christmas of 2011, going into 2012, we said, well, let's hold an event. So we held our first national conference in March 2012 in Edmonton. We had a huge response. So we had 140 people from nothing to 140 people who came to Edmonton to hear about the cloud and talk about the cloud, and that was about a year ago. So then we held our second event. We held an event in Ottawa in October 2012. And we drew not quite as many, but we had 120 people there talking about clouds, and these are a lot of the leaders in cloud. Last week we had our third national event in 2 years. We held it in Banff, and we had over 300 people. We had phenomenal success. We had to shut down registration. We had, call them some cloud computing rock stars, international cloud computing rock stars were on our speakers. We had probably about, and I'm not even going to get into the details of who they were, but probably some of the top 10 thinkers about cloud, at least in North America, were attending and were on our panels and were keynote speakers and all. And we really attracted a phenomenal crowd of people to that event. So we had originally thought we were going to hold one event in the east or in the west and one in the east and go back and forth. We're going to hold them all in Banff now. It's a it's a destination where we can attract these really, really good speakers and thinkers who will come. They come for free and share their observations, and it attracts the attendees. I'm saying more about the council than I had really intended, but it's an interesting organization, and we're trying to find the right balance. Although we would like to what we really want to do is support small, medium-sized cloud companies in Canada, and there's lots of them, and you'll see that's part of what I'll present. Right now, it's the major vendors who can sponsor an organization like this, so we have HP, we have IBM, we have Salesforce, we have TELUS, we have Bell. We have sponsors coming at us to sponsor this event because they all know the cloud. The cloud is it, and and we're the Canadian organization that's delivering cloud. So that's the advertisement for the Canadian Cloud Council. But that's where some of my perspective comes from on this. My way background is in distributed systems. Back when we called them distributed systems, and then I do have some background in cyber infrastructure, grid computing, those kinds of things. But about, let's say 2008, to give it a year, started observing that something new is happening, and it didn't have a name quite yet in 2008, but it has since become the cloud, and it's incredibly transformative. So my presentation, I'm actually going to begin with the conclusion, but then I'm going to take you back a little bit, give you some perspective, and then go back to the conclusion again. I have a demo of something that we're calling the Cloud Toolkit, and this isn't a technical conversation. It's more a pretty high-level, historic, broad perspective conversation. But if you have take questions or interaction at any time. So the conclusion is that at that conference, I chaired the last panel. The panel was sort of the grand finale of the conference. And we had 10 people, I'll mention who a few of those people were. We had 10 people in a 45-minute panel, and they were all supposed to get, and they all gave a rant basically about what should Canadian companies do to get into the cloud, what are the barriers to cloud, and what should Canada as a whole do to get into cloud. I'll mention Chris Kemp, who, and I don't know what everybody's background in cloud is, but Chris Kemp was the CTO at one of the NASA research labs who, he open sourced something called OpenStack, and that's going to become the de facto open source standard for the cloud. Peter Coffey, sort of the chief evangelist for Salesforce, person from Canada Post, ePost, big lineup. These were the conclusions. Get into the cloud now or be left behind. It's here now. There are no barriers, and there's no more excuses. A year ago, people were still putting up barriers and saying, "No, you know, I don't know about this thing. It could be just not real, or you know, just not going to happen." But it is happening now. So, individuals, how many people here use Dropbox? 100%, 50%, yeah. Or Google Calendar, even, or you know, those kinds of things. Individuals pretty much are there. Businesses, IT departments, etc., are just trying to catch up to where individuals already are. A lot of those applications that we use as individuals are not necessarily enterprise-ready processes or enterprise-ready systems, but a lot of them are. So it's just the point is there really isn't any excuse. It's just a matter of doing it now. Okay, and this is when thinking about giving this presentation. I didn't know how many people would want to have Cloud 101, like what is the cloud, or Cloud 201, which is why and what are the justifications for cloud, or where we are now might be Cloud 301 is just like how do I do it now? So I'm going to pop into two older presentations from quite a while back, and it'll show cloud's been around for a while. I'm going to talk pretty quickly through those. If we in the questions later on, if we want to go back to details, we might look at some of these. So actually in the spring of 2009, I started a company with a number of people, which was the first infrastructure as a service company in Canada. It was called VR Storm. We grew. It was a startup company, but we knew we could see this thing. By then, it did have the name the cloud, although we had been calling it maybe the pool, or like for pooling resources, things like that before that. But we could see the cloud coming. We started this company. This is the first presentation I gave with the company VR Storm. I'll tell a little bit about the history of VR Storm through some of this. This is really quite historic, but it's just saying the cloud is just a evolution, or it's building upon some of the computer science evolution over time. We had the World Wide Web. Web 2.0, you might say, is 201, where we started getting user-created content. And I was hypothecating, although at that time we were talking that Web 3.0 is really the semantic web, I think it's probably more the cloud. But no, that is all semantics about the semantic web. Yeah. This is the order of that presentation from 2009. And just talking about some of the evolutions through the 60s, the 70s, the 80s. Some of us have been there. This is what a machine room used to look like. I talk to people who have data centers now, and actually about 5 years ago, everybody wanted more data center space because they just wanted more and more, put more and more computers and data storage and all of that. Actually, with the density of servers and all of that now, you can sort of get twice as much or 4 times as much stuff in one rack these days, and you're getting a lot more into the data centers, and with virtualization, people are getting a lot more use out of their square footage. But this is what a data center looked like in the 70s or 80s. Probably the university here looked like that. This is what computers used to look like. Just show you, I, for the first time, traveled just with this for 2 weeks to Costa Rica a couple weeks ago. This is all I need now. I don't want to pay cellular charges, so this is just Wi-Fi capable. But everywhere I was in Costa Rica, even in pretty remote places, and this is just a tablet. So this is, we can all now just travel with either our cell phone or a tablet, unless you're going to do a lot of work and you need a keyboard or you need a lot of screen real estate. There's no reason to have lots of computers anymore, in my humble opinion. But I assume many of you are sort of, into a transition into the cloud, and if not, you should be, and that's sort of the point of this. So there's a number of key things that led to the Web 1.0 and the ability of that. We started getting search engines. Some of that foresee the cloud, perhaps. All of these, we're 8 years. Facebook was 8 years old. YouTube is now 7 years old. Some of these things, these are all new, quite new when they started, and now they're completely ubiquitous. So around 2009, we were thinking, is the next evolution of IT, or all of this, going to be cloud computing? And so this is 2009. You'll see in the further presentations that we're getting a lot more definition about this and a lot more solid. But there was, quite a bit of preliminary understanding about what the cloud was going to be. The cloud was never this definition, but this still holds pretty well true, although there's a much better one to measure cloud now. But it's common, basically. Lots of people can access it. You can, location independent, you can access it from anywhere. It's online, it's connected to a network. It's a utility, and that's key, and that it's measurable, and that you know how much you've used. That will be key. And there's a lot of things that are cloud-like, but they don't offer measured services, or they don't tell you how much you've used. And if it isn't utility-like, then it's not really a cloud, but it's on the evolutionary path to the cloud. And then on demand, you should be able to scale up, scale down your use as needed. And back in 2009, this is the traditional Gartner hype cycle, and we can see in 2009, cloud computing, was sort of at the peak of inflated expectations. Even back then, even though the term itself had barely been around for 2 years maximum, a year in some circles, but hadn't been around very long. But it was already seeing that it was a strong potential technology that would, in years to mainstream adoption, 2 to 5 years. Well, this was 2009, and we're in 2013. We're not completely over the chasm where everybody's using cloud, but we're definitely on our way there. I'm not going to get into details of what the cloud is, and if this group's interested and wants a more technical understanding and discussion, we can, somebody from the Cloud Council can come and give another talk to this group on any of these kinds of things. So I'm going to flip really quickly. These are, at that time, just giving some examples, and this was really, at that point, educating people about the cloud. So things like Google Calendar is a cloud application. You don't know where it is. Salesforce is the typical cloud application that's most commonly discussed, but there's lots of others. But this was the early days, and this is what was available then. So just some examples of these. And then Amazon. So, and this is, I don't know how many people know how the cloud got started and why, and so I will tell why Amazon is very, very important to the cloud. And if you don't know that, you wouldn't necessarily match Amazon, the online bookseller, with cloud computing. But Amazon, back in 2008-ish, realized that they had to have lots of computational power around Christmas time when they were mostly selling books, and then they'd have all this underutilized equipment sitting around for the rest of the year. And so they started selling off that excess computing capability. And that's what led to the cloud, that people realizing, actually, like a utility, like an electrical utility, let's say, different users will have different needs at different times. So if you actually effectively share all of this amongst the community, you can balance the load and make higher use of the capabilities. So it was Amazon really who started the first creation and vision for the cloud, and they probably didn't even know that they were getting into such a big business at that time, and it would become their dominant business. From Amazon services back then, you could order up operating systems, databases, you could order up batch processing, web hosting, different application environments, servers. You could do your video encoding and streaming. And even that was all back in 2009. And so people started using the cloud, and now it's a massive industry. And Amazon's the dominant provider of cloud. And pretty, there's some competition. This is what the pricing was like then. I think it's gone down. I haven't checked the pricing lately. And then oh, look at this, fancy graphics. Something very, very significant, though. September 15th, 2009, is the U.S. government decided to consider a policy to transition into the cloud. They could see that there was going to be big efficiencies, cost savings, productivity enhancement, ubiquitous computing, collaborative capabilities, everything that might come from the cloud. So they, on that date, they created apps.gov as a website. What they were going to do, and in fact eventually put into policy, is what's called a cloud first policy, and purchasing for government organizations has to consider cloud first. And this was the start of it, that this apps.gov would put make some cloud-based applications available, and all government departments should first consider buying from those rather than buying their own equipment and building their own applications. So this was also another pretty significant moment. So I'll go back. Again, just there's quite an architecture, and we'll see that in some of the further slides as we get to closer to this period in time. I'm still talking about 2009, but all of this was known then, and it's enabled because of virtualization, and there's different kinds of definitions at this point, though we were still defining it a bit. Yes. Sure.
You're going to get into it later, you let me know. Yep. But virtualization, is it a key pillar in enabling today?
Yes. Yes. And and it's not, it's called virtualization now. There were hints, or in fact, real virtualization before it was called virtualization, or even James Gosling's Java Virtual Machine, or emulators, or time sharing way back when. There's, it's basically getting a lot more out of a processor by putting an emulator essentially on it. That's called virtualization, and it's managed very, very, very well now, and you can get a lot of virtual machines on a single CPU these days. But virtualization is key to getting the kind of performance that is enabling this. But just virtualization isn't really the cloud. So you also need that scaling up and scaling down ability and the metering ability and other things. But yes, it couldn't be done without virtualization. So that's why that's there and it's key. Okay, so this was just summary then, and basically, it was high on the hype cycle, but Gartner does a lot of technological forecasting, and they could see it coming, and that it was 2 to 5 years away. So even back then, 2009 was saying, consider moving your applications to the cloud for these various reasons. Okay, I'm going to pop now into 2010. And so this was a year later, and when in 2009, the question really was, what is a cloud? Most people really hadn't heard about a cloud. It wasn't a common term. Now we're getting into 2010, and it's a little bit more, well, okay, now I understand what cloud is, a bit, but I'm not convinced that we're gonna use it. I'm not convinced yet. So it's a little bit more now about not what is a cloud, but why cloud. So we start with the cloud value. And all of this is still pretty, in traditional systems is still true. Growth in information is at least, growing 50% or more every year. This is still true. In traditional IT environments, 70% is on maintaining the current stuff instead of building new things for your business that bring business value. And if you're not virtualized or you're not on the cloud, 85% of the time the equipment sits around idle. I have 5 computers at home. I can only use one at a time, and I only use that about 8 hours a day or so. So I've got lots of wasted power. I'm getting rid of all my computers and going as cloud enabled as I possibly can. And I just mentioned yesterday, I installed Office 365 to find out what that was all about. And although it does put the whole system on your laptop right now, all those kinds of apps are going to move into the cloud. They're already there. A lot of them are already there. So back then it was about, as I said, about a rack, a cabinet of servers. If a company needs it, $200,000. You can actually. Well, with the densities these days, you can put half a million easily into a rack or into a half rack. Yeah. So back then, maybe I had dual cores back. This is only 4 years ago. Now we have quad and multi-quad and more than quad. I don't know. I don't know what else they have. Yeah. So just And you're paying for your power costs, your HR to run it, all of this, and this utilization rate too. If you're not moving to virtualized systems, and if you're not moving to the cloud, a lot of the time the equipment sits idle. Again, this is a little bit more about cloud computing. So I'm not going to get into a lot of detail. I assume most people know about the cloud these days. And just would rather know how to get on the cloud than what is it or why. But you can get access to any kind of compute that you want, or storage, network, security, for less. It costs less. These are some of the estimations of the growth, and my further slides I have what the current estimates are. And as I said, the apps. Governments are starting to move into the cloud. Canada they started a cloud roadmap, but nobody really got behind it at the time. And cloud computing can be green if you put these massive data center utilities near some low-cost energy, then all you have to do is transport the information via fiber to wherever it needs to go, and so you can reduce your carbon emissions, and the energy costs can be lower if you put data centers in green locations. It costs less energy to transmit photons on fiber optics than it does electrons, but there are also reasons that you do want to have your data centers close to the users too. If you really need low latency applications, or there are reasons that you also want to have the data centers in high people density areas too. But for the most part, lots of things can go out where energy is cheap.
Would you consider like a content delivery network to be like a form of cloud thing?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, you've spread things. Yeah, you've spread. You maybe.
Cache the data near.
Yeah. Yeah. So underutilized or less utilized things you put in the way, in the greener places, and then the content migrates closer to where it's needed. Yeah. So that, I mean, there's load balancing of the use, the content, and the energy and the expense, and Cyber and Canary they're doing a sort of a real-time sort of load balancing of content, where part of the balancing equation is not just is it cached for the user, but is it cost effectively cached too. So yes, that's cloud too. So that's another layering on top of cloud. So infrastructure as a service. What VRStorm was doing is infrastructure as a service, and I should tell the sad story of VRStorm at some point. But we eventually had to fold the company. We had raised $1.2 million in government and angel funding, and we had a cloud running in Alberta. We were opening our we needed to have a second site so you could have a backup site. We were opening a second site in Ontario. We had paying customers. We would sort of get net positive revenue in about 8 to 12 months, but we needed capital to grow. And at that point in Canada, and in any time in Canada, it's difficult to raise capital. So, and 2010 wasn't a good year for raising capital, and we eventually had to fold the company. So that's a sad story. Sorry, what?
What else were you offering?
Well, okay, and now we were offering infrastructure as a service. So I'll explain that, where just pure virtual machines. So I skipped over that. There's definitely a huge separation, and there's even finer separation now. But there's infrastructure as a service is when you sell virtual machines, basically. You can scale up and down virtual machines. That's infrastructure as a service. Platform as a service on top of that, something like Office 365 or a distributed type operating system would be called platform as a service. Salesforce.com, which is maybe customer relationship management in the web, maybe that's a platform as a service. And software as a service is when you buy apps in the cloud. And most of what people know of the cloud is this software as a service. But somebody has to provide the infrastructure as a service. And that's where Amazon is the dominant provider. VRStorm was providing infrastructure as a service, and very specifically to be a Canadian provider. Because there are regulations about privacy in Canada. Some jurisdictions want data to be resident in Canada, but I'll tell you that now that's not a barrier anymore. So it's not an absolute barrier. But there was a reason to have, and there still is a reason to have cloud companies based in Canada. Just this particular one didn't work out, but there's a few others that are coming on. So For those getting into the cloud, you might, and as we mentioned, virtualization is sort of the first step that organizations take. They put VMware or OpenStack or something that supports that, and then they can get more utilization out of their hardware systems. Then they start experimenting with the cloud. Then they start building foundations for truly using the cloud. And then they, ultimately can get the maximum benefit out of the cloud. And this is quite a illustrative diagram. I won't get into a lot of the details, but if you just do virtualization, you will get some benefits, and we might call that closed private cloud. And if you go to this extreme and use commodity public cloud like Amazon, you'll get the maximum benefits. You're using more standard infrastructure, your cost effectiveness increases. And then there are gradients of different kinds of clouds. Community private cloud, hosted private cloud, enterprise public cloud. I'll talk mostly, and these are all about the same, but there are slight differences. But for example, if you're a community private cloud can make sense if you're a very, very large organization. Like a university, they don't necessarily have to go to the commodity public cloud. They could build their own cloud, and there'd be enough diversity of users on campus that you could spread out the load of a private cloud. And that's what the community means. Doesn't mean the community broadly. It means a community. So the community of university users. Now this says it's off the internet. If you do move it and it's on the internet, you would call it a hosted private cloud. There's gradients there. So how to get started? There's lots of standards. Well, in fact, the standards are hardening now. There seems to be lots of options. It's all very new. How do I get started? And so this just suggests that you may start with lots of applications that are off the cloud and pick some and move them slowly into the cloud as appropriate. The advice is still the same. There's a lot of established infrastructure, established processes, things you don't throw away things right away, and some things are more suited to the cloud and other things aren't. So you do have to make a roadmap for what's most suitable to the cloud for your organization. Types of customers we had were basically software as a service companies, or companies that were never had any established infrastructure to begin with. If you were a company starting in 2009 or 2010 or now, there's no reason to buy your own servers anymore, ever. So everybody, everybody just builds in the cloud. But lots of enterprises have established infrastructure and big processes. So there are types of companies that somewhat move into the cloud earlier or start there. So VR Storm, and they said one of our value propositions, or one of our unique offerings, was that we were Canadian, and there still is a competitive advantage to this. And we had pretty awesome technology. And even for the geeks in the crowd, okay, here's a really complicated diagram. And even then, okay, we had, I'll go take off a few of these little things. This is the big geek moment here. Okay, just take off a few of those. Some of these things still exist. So Amazon, to some extent, you don't know how Amazon does its virtualization. It's actually a pretty closed back end. There is an open API. Rackspace, now Rackspace has completely changed, but they used to have a completely closed, and they were a dominant, they're now the second biggest to Amazon, but they're all OpenStack. But back then they were completely closed what it was their cloud was. Over here we started hearing a little bit about Microsoft and their what they were going to do, but it wasn't all that well known except they had something called Hyper-V. There was a number of different things coming on. So VMware, which is the dominant virtualization, they have something with the vCloud suite and all of that. They're fairly closed, although this is an open, or they, it's not open sourced, but they publish what the standards of the virtualization hypervisor structure is. So Sun and Oracle, Zen, Citrix, basically this is all collapsed down to, I think, okay, so there is Microsoft still. All of this in the middle and here pretty much is going, pretty much, a lot of people, so there's the closed standards and the open standards discussions and debates, but when Chris Kemp and when NASA open sourced OpenStack, even though there were some competing open source cloud systems, everything is really pretty much coalesced around OpenStack. So a lot of that, there will be some closed proprietary systems, and there'll be one or two open systems. And OpenStack is definitely going to be one of them. There may be a second, but there's a lot of the collapse of the competition, in my opinion. Although VMware stands alone, and Microsoft stands alone. But anyway, this goes into what we used some of that. We had a good advantage. And anyways, cloud computing is inevitable. Can save billions. Higher performance, more flexible, scalable, all those reasons. I'll get into why, yes, Canadian companies do have to adhere to Canadian privacy laws, but it's not as big there's more clarity around that now. And I suggest starting a pilot project now. How's time? Do I have what time is it? 7:15? Okay. I'll run for maybe another 15 minutes or so, and we'll see.
I was just going to ask, when all those closed clouds collapsed and all the customers had to migrate their stuff over, I bet you a lot of those were thinking once bitten, twice shy and going with open.
And they haven't, most of them still exist. So there's tons of people still running on Citrix systems. Not so many probably on Microsoft Azure. So a lot of those things still exist. This is my opinion, I guess, that, they haven't collapsed yet, but the signals are there that they're going to collapse. The way that there's Microsoft, there was Unix, Linux, then there was Microsoft, then there was Apple, there was three, and then Microsoft got very dominant, but then Linux came to the fore, and there was just Microsoft and Linux, but Apple came, so there's sort of a three-way. There's other competitors, little minor competitors that came in and out of what the dominant operating system would be, but it came down to three. Although now we have Android, but there's not a lot. So, but I'm just saying there's still a lot of those players do exist, but I think a lot of them are losing market share, and the consolidation of the standards around open source, OpenStack, and the Amazon API is happening. That's my opinion. Yeah, yeah. So I think people know enough that so we'll get to what do you do? What's my recommendation? Use open standards. And now, what are those standards? That's a good point. I'm suggesting that OpenStack is the dominant infrastructure as a service open standard. There are still some more questions. Okay, so back here. Oh, am I there? Okay, so now 2011, 2012, we're now into 2013, and it really is a lot more about not what is cloud, what's the benefit, it's how do I do it? And some of the same confusing questions are there. What platform do I choose? But basically, and at the conference we talked a lot about the intersection or the way it's not, you can't differentiate, or there aren't big huge differentiators or silos or boundaries that you can draw anymore around mobile, social, and cloud. These are all coming together. People now want to pick their own device, and it's either your cell phone size or your tablet size or your laptop size, but people are used to having that. Most people are using storage as a service and software as a service in some way. They may not even realize it. And now all kinds of other things, analytics, big software tools, high performance computing, all that's available in the cloud now. But business processes and cultures haven't completely changed. Most people, I call them the downtown, the people who go to work and don't think about cloud, they don't know they're using cloud, and they still probably have their desktop machine, and they still have their certain processes that run. So there's a lot of things that haven't changed and haven't moved to the cloud, but some things definitely have. It's the processes and culture that haven't necessarily adapted to the technical capability, and it's a cultural transformation as well as a technological transformation now. So there was a number of people are talking about cloud, thinking about different standards. There's lots of different standard organizations, but the one standard that became the standard is the NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technology model. This was published in September 2011. It breaks down cloud into as I mentioned, infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, software as a service, roles around the cloud consumer, cloud auditors, service management, cloud broker, cloud carrier, security and privacy, etc. This has become the standard architectural model that people use to describe cloud. It's in revision right now, but this is what everyone knows and uses, and it's essentially the main architecture. If we look at the Gartner, the 2012 hype cycle for emerging technologies, now cloud computing might just hit they do typically go through the trough of disillusionment, and this is sometimes maybe people expect more, or it's harder work than they thought it was, or they buy one system and then they realize, uh-oh, that one's a Betamax, and they have to throw that whole system out and go VHS, and then it's VHS, and they have to, oh my God, I have to get a DVD player now, or but we're going to go through some of this while more standards emerge. You can see private cloud computing's up there. So those are some of the general technologies, but now cloud has its own hype cycle. So this is 2012. It maps out what is mature in the cloud and what isn't mature in the cloud. So there's things, cloud advertising, Salesforce automation, virtualization, software as a service, enhanced network delivery, infrastructure as a service. Quite a lot of that is actually just on the upswing. There's still technologies that are just emerging and others that are potentially hyped at this point. They have platform as a service up there. Cloud collaboration services. I collaborate use collaborative systems all the time now. Anyway, so it's a whole field with a lot of study about what's going on, because this is a big thing. So worldwide cloud services is going to surpass 109 billion. Remember in 2009, and I looked at the Gartner forecast. Well, they said it was going to be 150 billion by 2014. So I don't know if they're completely on track, but it was an $8 billion market 4 or 5 years ago, and now it's a $109 billion market. And you can read this, and if you want the slides, they'll be available, and I put some of the references so you can follow up on the details. Right, that's a business process as a service. And that is putting some of your process, it could be your financial processing or your customer relationship management system, putting some of those kinds of things into the cloud. And you know, small businesses and businesses, you can move your whole financial department or your financial software at least into the cloud and just have run it as an app. Or, you can move a lot of these all these standard processes, human resources, customer management, those kinds of things into the cloud. So the U.S., which was very visionary in 2009 when they announced the cloud first policy. They're more mature in that, but it was more difficult than they thought it would be actually. So they isn't it, you know, like many things, they put up a storefront of cloud apps, but then you know they realized how do we accredit providers to put apps in the store. So they didn't want just any apps there. They wanted them to go through some kind of due diligence accreditation process. So that has taken a while. But that's in place now, where if a vendor wants to have their software made available to all of the government by the government catalog, they can go through an official accreditation process and put it up there. Same with the UK. It can be a rigorous due diligence process, but now you're an approved cloud service provider to a very large customer. Canada's, so I just found that this was just announced in February. So the action plan on open government. I don't know a lot about that yet. So I do sit on the Shared Services Canada Architectural Framework Advisory Committee. We meet monthly. So Government of Canada has 140 different departments, and each of those departments have their own data center. And each of those data centers run different technologies for all these different departments. Well, there's a tremendous efficiency potential there, but it's going to take a long time to transition. So they're putting in place an architecture to help modernize all of that infrastructure. Probably go down from 140 data centers to less than 20, let's say, or you may. I mean, the different departments, certain departments, Department of National Defense might want to have a very closed, bunkered system. Other public records, yes, but there's a lot of things that can move out into different types of data centers. So they're working on that. We're not anywhere near a cloud first policy in Canada, but we do. I'll read this. I haven't read this action plan on open government yet. So almost done here. The panel last week of these pretty significant people in cloud in North America. If I can just summarize what they're saying is use standards, use open systems, and we have VMware and Salesforce and closed systems people there too. Those companies know that they have to open up their systems to work with open systems, or at least have the interfaces, because we can see that's the way it's going. Evaluate your data and applications, prioritize which are best suited for the cloud. and make the commit to moving at least one application, and you'll be amazed, and then commit to moving another one. There's still a lot of education to be done, so I haven't put a lot of use cases here, but the people want to know, well, how did somebody else do this? How can I do this? We need some more of that. So you can read all of those. It's basically make a plan to move to the cloud now. The three biggest barriers you hear is security, privacy, and network connectivity. And their security can be better in the cloud. These cloud provider data centers are more secure. You become more cognizant about your security policy when you do put things into the cloud. So in fact, you pay more attention to security. So it becomes better, and there's less vulnerabilities. I don't store any. Well, there's not a lot of useful data available on that. Whereas there's probably more vulnerable data available on the laptop here. Privacy. So Canada has privacy laws. There are things that you have to do if you're going to move data into the cloud, but it's all manageable. And our committee, or the Canadian Cloud Council, and the people there realize, well, like, one of our biggest issues in Canada is our bandwidth costs and our caps. And we don't see that that's going to change anytime really soon. So although we continually push and say that this is an issue, it also is it's something that we have to work with. That can make us more efficient, and we may come up with better ways to get around bandwidth caps, or do different kinds of caching, bandwidth management capping. I don't know if something creative because of those costs. It is something that we can't solve immediately. We're about to publish a few articles from last week. I don't know if this is going to get in there, but in Canada we built the railroad. It was a national dream. Brought the country together. We're all familiar. In the past, government has taken up the cause to put in water utilities, electrical utilities, telecommunications utilities, and all kinds of transportation networks, from canals to interprovincial highways and things. So building a utility is something that government has done, and it's been so building a national cloud utility isn't completely unreasonable. Maybe give it to all K to 12 students. Anyways, it's a dream, but it's something that visionary leadership could do in Canada.
Would it be a regulated utility?
If it would be, you might restrict its use to, not for profit, or say education. It's a utility, definitely.
I guess my question is more about, would it be regulated? Because I'm trying to think what regulator this would fall with. Is it CRTC, or where do we go? Knock on the door.
Yeah, as part CRTC, it's bandwidth and content, and that it can be facilitated by shared services, public work. So Shared Services Canada is this part that's within Public Works, and so Public Works is the government department that provides those public services. So this could be considered public services under Public Works. And we have something sort of like this in Alberta. We have SuperNet in Alberta, and we, the government of Alberta did lay down the backbone and bandwidth and some connectivity for something like this. And it's all that it's easy to say, wave your hands and say, oh, it's all there and it's easy to do, but it could be done. It really, would be somewhat visionary and take a lot of leadership to do that. But and maybe some municipalities are doing that, and there's some things like our province is doing that, and you can do that at different levels, but it could be a national dream. Okay, so back to, the conclusions. I said do something now or be left behind. The cloud is here. There's no real barriers. No more excuses. Start moving into the cloud. I can take a couple more minutes to show one more little thing if people are still interested. Okay. So the Canadian Cloud Council, we're a national organization. We put on these events. But another thing that we're starting to do, and it's almost like any tech association might do this, you might call it sort of a service directory. So if you were ever a member of the Chamber of Commerce or of the Alumni Club, you'd have a directory of all your members. So what we're doing is building a directory. You can't see a lot of it here, but building a directory of all the cloud providers in Canada. So we call it the Cloud Toolkit. It's sort of soft launched. We've only been developing it for 3 months, but we already have people interested in advertising on it and doing things on it. And so what this is showing you could actually advertise up here. We put some of the big vendors up there because they can pay for advertising. So it's a sample that they might pay for advertising. But what we really want to do is provide a venue for showcasing Canadian cloud providers, and especially small and medium-sized providers. And so you can see down here, and I'll go through some of the tabs really quickly, but the latest companies these are just different companies that are in the cloud space offering cloud services. These are the latest services that have been added to the catalog. And then we have toolkits where these are just very short articles. They could be white papers, but we just call them toolkits. They're how to move into the cloud or what some important things are. So, for example,
so can you search these guys? Like,
yeah.
Say, okay, I need a Tomcat.
Yep. So this is where this is here. I just went cloud. You can go in and play around with it. It's live. We don't actually do a development version, a production version. This could change from day to. It is what it is. I told everybody, don't do anything tonight. Here's a list of companies. So you can look. We have about 50 companies and about 100 services in there. It's to sort of demonstrate. We have visions of it being really rich information, more like to the API, like what platform does it run on, what API is it using, and those things. It's not to that level of granularity in the information yet, but that's definitely in the vision. So let's see I'll just go to the advanced search and see. So you can search by keyword, different kinds of service categories, and then within the service categories, different types of service subcategories. And I'll show you this. I showed you the NIST model before. We actually have this picture, and you can click on at the highest level parts of the different providers to give you your first cut at search, and then you can search subcategories on there. We do have a better, even another deeper kind of search somewhere, and we have so then we have explanations. What are the NIST explanations? What is software as a service, and what are these different things? So things that light up you can search in. So I'll leave it at that. This will take us back to the Canadian Cloud Council page. So this is a project that we're working on. We're not for profit. We're funded by our own selves. It's a volunteer organization. We're bootstrapping the organization by having these national events, and our last one was very successful. We're building up this service catalog so that we can help our members. And the next version of this, we're definitely going to have an advertising model, and we're actually having companies coming to us who already want to start advertising on this, because you can see it doesn't have to be just Canadian companies. It could be lots of different companies, and we could take it to a deeper level where it actually becomes a catalog where you're shopping for very specific things. Like, how about if you want a shopping cart that has a certain kind of API and works on a certain kind of platform, and we could have services advertised at the level of service. Right now, it's advertised at the level of companies and a little bit at the macro level of what services they offer in words. But this can go into a lot of different useful directions. So that's what we're working on now. So our next conference is next April in Banff, and welcome you all to attend that. Thanks. Questions? Discussion? Yeah.
So you mentioned about pilot projects. What kind of projects would you recommend to be a good candidate?
Good. You could do, there's a couple of ideas. Either a development project. So if you're doing some development, you actually want to, you may be ramping up your team. You could do your development in the cloud. You can get as many Linux servers, as many Windows servers, whatever you want. Do your development out there. So if you're developing a new product, because then you don't need those kind of development class servers. I mean, you may deploy on a lower grade virtual server, so you can have big honking development servers if you want. That's one. Collaboration tools. So I said I use. This is where it's hard to decide which one to use, but just pick one and use it. So there's lots of team collaboration tools. So you have your threaded conversations. You put your document repository. You put all the documents for that project. So a collaboration tool in the cloud. Those are a couple.
One of the things that I kind of discern from your presentation is that the technology is robust enough to support what the majority of users could
I'd
do.
say absolutely.
Is that
Yes.
your statement?
Yes, there are businesses that run 100% in the cloud now. In that sense, it's robust enough. You do occasionally hear about cloud out, just like you can have power can go out in a city or sometimes a little bit of the cloud goes out and things go down a little bit. So you have to work in a little bit more. You might want a failover system and things like that. But no, I mean it's basically there. That's not the barrier anymore. Is my strong assumption, strong statement.
So as a computer science department head, what are the messages here for us? I'm thinking of a few things. One is rethinking our lab, how we offer computer science education. And the other is rethinking our students so that we don't hinder or constrain their thinking too much.
Right.
Any advice for you?
Sure. Yeah. So it's well, instead of ever buying hardware for a lab ever again, commodity computing hardware or workstations or anything like that, take that budget and put it aside and buy credits buy credits for your students in the Amazon cloud. That do all your courses in the cloud. That's better. At least one, wait one at a time. As I say, maybe baby steps. I don't know if any of them are really done in the cloud yet, but pick one at least next semester and do it in the cloud. And yeah.
Actually, I was just thinking, just to follow up and say, there's probably no computer science student today who doesn't have their own computer, right?
And phone, and tablet, and
Yeah.
possibly several of the above.
So, yeah, like, why would you even have a computer? Like,
Well,
the,
so you
the
should-
days of like going in at 3 in the morning just so you get some computer time.
Yes, and even laptop, as I said, and you can buy, I think people and students and us developers and consumers should start really realizing how often do you need a big keyboard and a big screen. And I do for some reasons, so I have that, but for most reasons I don't. And that's, for me, that's all a computer is now, is a keyboard and a screen. How big a screen do you need, and how tactile do you need your keyboard to be, because so much else is out in the cloud.
So when I was an undergraduate in this university taking computer courses, I did 2 undergraduate degrees, so I was here for a while. I did a minor in computer science, took 4 years, went away, came back, upgraded to a major for 2 more years. So that with the gap in the middle, there was still about 6 or 7 years that I experienced computers at the University of Calgary. And there was, in that period of time, about 3 different major changes to either the hardware that we were using in the labs and or a complete shift in software. From 1 year we're teaching Computer Science 201 in Pascal, to another year we're doing it in C, to another year we're doing it in something else. And when I think back to the amount of money that probably had to be spent to swap Motorola's for Multics servers, for Unix servers, plus train the IT staff internally to keep it up and running, plus buy new software licenses and install all that, had I been able to just be told, here's your login ID on your Amazon account, and this year we're teaching you this platform, I can totally see where that might be a way of keeping the curriculum fresh and always being able to be at a closer to the cutting edge of technology, because it's cheaper to go to a new version when you don't have to install it and learn how to use it and upgrade it and maintain it yourselves.
Yeah, that is where all of this is going. That back end is just going to become a utility, and you can get whatever kind of either virtual machine or piece of software or temporary data storage. And
even if you do have a lab, it can just have a very minimal server or piece of equipment, a laptop or a simple PC, that really you're just using it as a remote desktop into the cloud environment. It doesn't have to have a lot of computing power of its own. Yeah,
pretty much. And no, it is, I mean, back to time sharing or whatever on mainframes, it's just the bandwidth is exponentially bigger and the capabilities are bigger, and we can put them much further away and all kinds of things. There's still some, and the trade, this is really all you need is a screen and a keyboard. And if you're doing, let's say you're doing CAD work, and or you can be doing design work. Now you want a big screen. You want your keyboard, and they somewhat do caching for. It's more like caching, or it's not. That application isn't completely in the cloud, but it's becoming more of a utility model. You have to. On some applications like that, they trade off how much is in the cloud and how much is local. So you might need some local, very local caching space for some of that. But those are the kinds of things that the decisions that are being made now. You can get everything. So you can get Illustrator, Photoshop, all of those in a cloud-based utility model. You can get your whole Windows suite, cloud, Office 365. You can get Google Suite. Whatever I have on that is the open suite, but it's all more or less running out in the cloud, and you just get used to pay. Instead of paying a $500 license and holding on to this old software for 5 years, you pay $10 a month or something like that, and you've always got the latest version. It's like cable TV subscription or cell phone subscription. You pick the channels you want or what you want, and it's a pay-per-use model.
It's harder to pirate.
Harder to yes, no. Well, the companies, you see, and the companies, and this is the same way music industry companies or production companies, fought CDs and those kinds of things. the traditional software companies originally fought the cloud too, but they'll actually make more money, or they can potentially make more money on a metered basis and less piracy. So they've got a continual stream of $10 a month instead of somebody paying $500 one time. So initially the companies were fighting the transition to the cloud, but all the major software vendors, well, not all, some are still not going there, but most of them are moving to the cloud, and they can see that they'll get actually a good recurring revenue model out of it too.
I guess a case in point is the TurboTax. The cheapest return you can do online is $17. You can buy the system for less than 20 and do 9 or 10 returns on it. So there is a difference, and that's in one sense that's where I always have this opposition. Is it's that constant metering on the system,
Yep.
which looks good when you look at it from a single point of view. Oh, it's only this much, it's only this much. But once you start adding all the suites together,
It's not just cost saving. It is. In the end, it's not a much or any cost saving. Or you spread it out instead of big purchases. You spread it out, but it's also the more ease of use. So I run QuickBooks in the cloud. So this is not just doing your once a year accounting, whatever. Instead of having a $500 license in every small business for QuickBooks, it runs in the cloud. It's $19.95 in the cloud. It's always up to date, and I can access it if I'm in Costa Rica or wherever I am. I've got I can, you don't want to work there, but you've got access to all your software instead of just lugging around. I consider it lugging around a laptop now.
As respect to your company you are starting, subsequently how anyone else comes into that space?
We have a minute there. There's two companies that had the same idea at that time and started up, and they both actually, we started up within a month of each other, and after 2 years we closed within a month of each other. The biggest cloud company in Canada is Rack Force. They're a data center in BC, and they do virtualized hosting. They don't really have dynamic scaling, but they're pretty much the closest in Canada. So they're not really pure cloud. There's lots of companies that offer software as a service based out of Canada, but they'll run on they're running on Amazon. And then there are a few that that sort of white label a cloud and sell it from Canada, but there's no really pure cloud infrastructure as a service companies. There's sort of still a need for that, but since it doesn't exist, and since Amazon is just hardened so fast, as a standard, and some of these others, there's probably not the same competitive unless you're going after government. There's still a competitive advantage, but the answer is no. There are no pure play infrastructure as a service companies in Canada at all. Pure cloud infrastructure as a service. Yep.
How do companies deal with the security
there's security and there's privacy. And the privacy, you can get around Canadian privacy laws. It's not getting around it, it's adhering to them. You can adhere to Canadian privacy laws if you're a private company, if you disclose to your users that you are hosting outside of Canada. So in that license agreement that you don't read and you click through, in there, you put, I'm aware that my personal information is being hosted outside of Canada. So that's how a private company can adhere to Canadian privacy laws and host in the US. That's the privacy question. And then it's different for public. For governments have more rules about storing personal information. So governments can't just jump up and universities probably can if they can if they advise their users, but public organizations have to be a little bit more careful about personal information. The security, it depends on how secure does this information really have to be. If you're in the cloud, you are encrypted. I mean, it is. I mean, you're at least pretty much encrypted. If all your stuff is on Dropbox, you don't even notice it, but it is encrypted. It is encrypted in the transmission and encrypted in the storage, so it's secure to that level. Should you put your corporate secrets in Dropbox? No. You should take other security measures for that kind of thing. So an IT department would look at the kinds of information that they're putting in the cloud, and they would set security policy on what can go in the cloud and how to secure it. So it would make you pay more attention to security, but it can be done too.
I think part of the security issue is that a lot of people that are implementing cloud infrastructures don't understand security. They don't understand how it works and where the limits are. So people are simply, programmers are simply grabbing public domain code and modules without necessarily understanding how it all fits and how it's going to be used that way. And I think that accounts for a lot of the issues we see and stories we hear about Dropbox, for example. Dropbox has been broken into numerous times. And recently there's been a paper published that indicates on your smartphones that your Dropbox is caching information to speed up retrieval times, and the cached information on your phones is unencrypted. So there's lots, you gotta, devil's in the detail is probably the best way to describe it.
Yep. Yes.
You mentioned, you didn't dwell on it, but that it tended to be an open source environment, and that the downtown folks, the big companies, were kind of the last ones to maybe to adopt this stuff. And I was just thinking about the conversation I've had, and I'm downtown looking at some of these big guys who have the licensing agreements, and they don't go for the open source solutions, they go for the big licensing agreements. And I just had a conversation about Oracle changing their licensing rules to do the costing by CPU, and it was a downward push on virtualization. And as a result, this company was moving away from virtualization. And I saw it as a commercialized attempt to save market because of virtualization. So I pick up on your note that it seems to be an more suited to open source philosophy. It isn't good for when people go by licenses, go cloud. You're going to lose all that market.
And there's still lots of room for maybe not proprietary systems, but like vendors. I think there is room for the vendors who get it right to sell more close, like not open sourced, but they still have to have open APIs or the ability to talk to each. This is you can't be a completely closed shop. You don't have to go all the way to open sourcing, but a lot of the infrastructure as a service is open source software. Or could be like Red Hat supported Linux. It's open source and supported commercially by others. So the infrastructure as a service layer to a large extent is open source, except for VM, but open sourced. But up the layers, you definitely want to just be open, at least have open APIs. So Oracle, and I can't, they should open themselves up more to working with others more, rather than actually trying to get their customers more and more stuck and vendor dependent.
Yeah, they're
So-
trying to squeeze money out of it. That's
Well,
all it is.
Oracle does have an open source cloud or open source virtualization. Is that the Solaris, the open box, I believe? VirtualBox. But they have their private stuff too.
Exadata or something.
Yeah, so a lot of these traditional companies that had vendor lock-in will have to figure out their cloud strategy, and some will succeed and some won't. And so the Oracle and the Citrix and the VMware and the Microsoft and they all have to figure it out how they're going to work in this new world.
I'll also point out that you can actually bring up an Oracle RDS instance, so it's their relational data service, Oracle. They have MySQL, Oracle, and one of the, not Postgres. But they do have Oracle on Amazon.
I was going to. I think you probably can. So there's going to be more and more of that kind of thing. You can bring up a virtual, if you want to call it an Oracle machine, but.
And the licensing is built into the cost of that instance, so you don't have to purchase a license for it. However, if you already have an Oracle license at your company, they also provide a way of applying that licensing to your cloud instance as well.
And for those I don't know if this is a joke, but there still are lots of legacy systems like Fortran-based systems still around, and there's some old operating systems, IBM OS2 or something like that was an operating. So this is another way actually to still run legacy systems is have a virtual Fortran machine in the cloud or a virtual OS2 machine. Now I don't know that they exist. And they shouldn't. They should rewrite those systems. But, but that's another thing the cloud can do. Instead of having that old, if you still have some machine around running OS2 or Fortran, because it has somebody really wants it, if you can get it virtualized and put it in the cloud, maybe you can get rid of that hardware.
A lot of companies do that. They take old machines and they do a physical to virtual conversion. And now it sits virtually, and when they need to run it, they power up the virtual.
Yeah. Yeah. So, a lot of information. If you want to know more about the Canadian Cloud Council, just ask. And if you want any more speakers over time, just let me know too.